Hello, and welcome back to the My First Marathon podcast, where we interview runners in all stages of their running careers about their first marathon experiences to prove that anyone can run a marathon. My name is Taylor, and today's episode's a little bit different than our normal style, but I know you're going to get a ton of value out of it, especially if you're someone who's gone through an injury before. I sat down with the owner of Aletheia Runs, who talks about how initially in his running career he experienced injury after injury while training for his first few marathons, and this is what eventually led to a lifelong curiosity of learning about the body's interconnectedness. We dig into a wide variety of topics, and honestly, I do him a disservice trying to explain them myself because he's super smart. But I know I was absolutely fascinated this entire episode. Let's jump into it. I'm excited to welcome Sean from Aletheia Runs. Sean, thank you so much for coming on the show this weekend. Really excited to have you on. You are the founder, owner of Aletheia Run, so I know we're going to get into a lot of injury prevention stuff today, which is obviously very topical for us marathon runners. But thank you for coming on the show. Excited to talk to you.
No, thank you very much. I'm really excited to do this, and hopefully somebody will find something of benefit today. So.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, we'll get into a whole lot of knowledge, but I'd love to just hear from yourself first on your personal journey. How'd you get into running? Where did this all start for you?
So I was born in Toledo, Ohio, and I grew up in Michigan, just south of Detroit in Monroe County. And I started, my high school was a national powerhouse for wrestling, and running was a big part of our conditioning. And so I started running as part of wrestling practice, and then I really liked it. My senior year, I went out for cross country. We had a great cross country team, and unfortunately, I got injured from overtraining. Trained for a couple marathons at the end of my senior year in high school, ended up injured with those as well. Trained for 3 more marathons in college, got injured on every single one of those, including the Grandma's Marathon. After I graduated, when my wife was pregnant with our first child, I decided while she was gaining weight to start a marathon, which I didn't realize was not the best thing to do. Make her feel great, but that was just a therapist. And I just kept getting injured with running, so I kind of put it to the side for a little while. And then in 1996, we moved out to Port Angeles, Washington on the Olympic Peninsula. And we were right next to the Olympic National Park. And so I started doing a lot of trail running when that wasn't popular. So I go out for 20, 30 plus mile runs. Everybody was curious as to why I'd be doing that versus walking. But by then we had 4 children, so I was always pressed for time.
Sure,
and,
yeah.
So I kept running, got injured again. I was always getting injured, usually with pain down my right leg. Ended up with really severe sciatica. Spent about 3 years not being able to run nor walk. Then we moved down to Central Oregon for a year, and then in 2004 we moved over to Eugene, Oregon, which is the mecca for running. At that time, my background, formal education, was I went to Central Michigan University for a sports medicine degree, so I was a certified athlete trainer. I went to the University of Michigan, got my master's degree in physical therapy. And by the time we moved to Eugene, I was working on a PhD in orthopedic and sports science.
Wow, yeah.
And so, I was invited to teach at the University of Oregon, started teaching in their athletic training graduate program, made a lot of contacts, and then I was decided to open up my own practice here in Eugene right off the plate, and had access to a lot of the Nike runners eventually. And then in 2008, Eugene brought back the Olympic trials for track and field.
Yeah.
And then by then I was working with a lot of the Nike elite runners. So I became very, very interested in running mechanics. I had access to 4 or 5-year-old kids that were running, which is popular in this community, all the way up to 80 and 90-year-olds that were running. So we decided in our practice to devote it primarily to gait analysis, both walking and running. And so we bought about $150,000 worth of engineering equipment. I'd say the price just because we were I was all in.
Yeah.
Sensor treadmill, electromyography to measure muscle activity, a biodex to measure strength activity. And it was a lot of fun. From 2008 to 2012, we saw a lot of very elite runners. During the Olympic trials, runners would come in from around the country. So I get to do some evaluation and treatment on a lot of people I didn't know, and just became more and more interested in running, especially the injuries. It was I think I just stated this before. Some studies will show, systematic reviews will show that up to 80% of our runners can be injured during the year to the point where they
Sure.
need to seek medical attention. And that is really an interesting statistic because it almost pushes me to ask, okay, if people are running to be healthy, what's healthy about the chance that 80% of the time you may have a serious injury that
Yeah, that's a
requires
great
more
point.
care? Yeah, so that's kind of where I spent the rest of my, I finished up my doctoral dissertation work was on patellofemoral pain, or pain in the front of the knee, which is usually the most common source of pain for females in particular. You'll see it in all different types of sports, but particularly in running. And that's pain that people will experience along the inside of their knee, and it's kind of like a J-type position. They'll come up to the front of the knee.
Mm.
And the standard, when I started looking at this condition as to how to treat it, the primary focus historically was to treat the quadricep muscles in the front of the leg and the hamstrings, or felt that there was an imbalance. The other common thought was that the kneecap wasn't tracking correctly. And think of the knee like the kneecap like a train, and the bone underneath the thigh bone or femur would be a train track.
Mm.
And so the thought was that somehow the kneecap or the train was jumping off the track because the muscles
Mm.
inside the leg were too weak, particularly the vastus medialis muscle, part of your quadriceps, and that the iliotibial, excuse me, the iliotibial band on the outside was too tight. So they called that a mistracking. And so the thought was, well, if we tape the kneecap to position it correctly, and then we strengthen the muscle on the inside of the leg, and then we stretch the IT band on the outside, now the kneecap will track correctly. So that was a historical perspective. Not very much success in the literature. I'm sure there's always going to be individuals who benefit from any of these types of interventions. Then the focus shifted more toward the ankle foot, a lot of orthotics and different shoe wear to say, well, okay, when the foot hits the ground, if it hits the ground inappropriately, whatever that means, then the knee's taking an undue amount of force or stress, and that
Mm.
hurts the knee. That wasn't too successful overall as an intervention, or at least not in the larger scope. So then the focus became on the hip in the late 1990s, and that
Sure.
the hip bone controls the way the thigh bone moves. So one of the new paradigms would be to say, okay, we thought that the kneecap was jumping the track, but really what it is, it's the train track underneath that's moving. So it moves
Mm.
inwards if you don't control hip motion. It's like you're running and your hip drops. The
Right,
femur moves
right.
in, and then it's the kneecap jumps relative to that. So the kneecap's not jumping off the track. The track's moving underneath. And the
Sure.
thought was we start to work on strengthening the hip, the gluteal muscles, then the thigh bone won't move in a way that's not ideal. So there's been a lot of research on that. It's had some success, but my doctoral dissertation work went up the chain and looked at a muscle called the quadratus lumborum, which is above the hip, and it's a muscle that connects the rib cage to the pelvis.
Okay,
And
yeah.
yeah, so it's a muscle that's commonly overlooked, but I had some research that was stating that if the quadratus lumborum was hyper irritated, and you could determine that by pushing on it or poking on it, what it would do is that the quadratus muscle was irritated, that it could, through an electrochemical or neurological process, it would shut down the ability of the glute muscles or hip muscles to generate
Mm.
force. So it's just there, and there's some neuromechanical reasons why that may be. So that ended up being my doctoral dissertation work. I think I completed that around 2010, and we published a few articles on that. And so it's just one more way to look at this system. Running is a very, very complex activity because it's just a
Sure.
bunch of one-legged hopping. And so, yeah, I think the most frustrating thing I mentioned to you before the podcast started, I've been doing a lot of reviews, systematic reviews and meta-analysis of running related injuries around the world. Are there any interventions that are particularly successful for running related injuries? And it's very clear that no, the answer is no. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean that these interventions might not be successful for certain individuals, but overall, could we apply it to everybody for a large portion of the society? No. So I think we need better tools. We need some different paradigms, ways to looking at
Sure.
these related injuries. There's a lot of things that are oftentimes, well, let's just say the common thought is these running related injuries are due to overuse and that we're
Yes.
overusing the muscles and the soft tissue and the bone. That's a dangerous road to go down. It may be true, but if it's true, why are we not finding this valid models in the literature to demonstrate that that's correct? I
Yeah,
think that
makes sense.
running related, yeah. So I think the running related injury definitely one of the variables is overuse and damage to soft tissue or irritation to soft tissue and bones. But it's not clear that that's the only answer because when
Yeah.
we're doing strengthening and doing other interventions, we're still not getting the results that we want to see. And I think because of that, there's a big shift toward regenerative medicine right now. So there are clinicians that do, usually doctors, nurse practitioners, naturopathic physicians that are doing injections into soft tissue now, platelet-rich
Mm.
plasma, stem cells. Um, the literature is fairly clear that those interventions are also not overwhelmingly that successful.
Mm.
Um, and, and I would just state this real quickly would be there's a lot of problems with the research literature, and everybody always wants to quote studies, but very few people have a very good understanding of how to read a study. They think they might.
Yeah.
There was a popular study that I won't say too much that just came out that just had 10 subjects. That's ridiculous. You can tell very little with 10 subjects. That's barely what I
Yeah.
would consider a pilot study. And yet it got published in one of the top journals. And I'm like, okay, this is clearly the problem.
Sure.
This is ridiculous. But anyway, I think I've got some. We're with our wearable. We have a device that we think is very reliable and it's very valid, and we
Yeah.
think it's the future for diagnosing injuries and then decreasing the likelihood that you would have an injury. We have to be very careful. I'm not saying prevent injuries, but decrease the likelihood that you would have an injury. Is
Sure.
a more appropriate way to say that because there's too many variables involved in getting injured that I couldn't control it with our device.
Sure.
So it's kind of the short intro, but yeah, with the running,
Yeah.
I also would say right now, I've taken the last few years off of running because I was trying to, I'm about 60 years of age. And I say this on every podcast. I'm kind of obsessed with turning 60 here.
Sure.
When we moved here, when I was in my early 40s, I thought it was interesting as you get older, oftentimes, and you're very young, and I have 4 kids that are in their 20s.
Yeah.
Moved here, I met a lot of former Nike runners that were turning 40 and they were very excited. And I said, why are you excited that you're getting older? And they said, well, because I'm going to be a master athlete and I can kill everybody at this age.
Well, I love that. Yeah, good mindset shift.
Yeah, and I think it's very positive change. And about 4 years ago, 3, 4 years ago, I was trying to figure out something that I could do to still stay competitive that I would be
Sure.
happy with. And I got into powerlifting. And so I've done extremely well with powerlifting, and I'll be 60 in August. And I have a really, really great opportunity to break several of the world records. So I'm excited
Wow,
about hitting the
congrats.
60. I'm not
Yeah.
competing this year because I don't want to get injured until I
Sure.
turn 60. So I've kind of held on my own running because it tends to stiffen up my low back. And I want to get some other things done first. And then I plan on going back into running in the fall after October. There's a big meet. So yeah.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of where I'm at, but I see a lot of runners in my physical therapy practice. I'm over in Redmond, and then I have plans on moving back over to Eugene as well. So I'll be practicing in both communities.
Cool. Well, as an Oregon girl, you're speaking my language for sure.
Yes.
That's great. I love it. So your journey here was really you having an injury experience, and then all of this kind of led into this whole education rabbit hole you found yourself in for several years. If you were like looking back on yourself as a runner when you were going through all of those injuries, what do you think are some things that like current you now would have addressed with past you back then that was going through all the injuries?
Oh, very clearly. I've changed quite a bit over the years.
Sure.
I'm very competitive only within myself. I'm not one of those. I've never understood individuals that want to compete and win at every game. But if I think I can win, I'm 100% in. And those are usually just in certain activities. But I think when I used to run, I had a tendency to push very, very hard.
Mm.
My junior and senior year of high school, senior year in particular, We were defending state champions in Michigan. It was a very big deal, and I just decided I wanted to go all in. So I would run 7 days a week. This is back, I graduated in 1983, so quite a long
Yeah.
time ago. We were under the influence of the Rocky movies and so forth. The harder you work, the
Sure.
better you get. So I was running 7 to 10 miles, 6 days a week. I'd run 22 miles on Saturday before the
Wow.
season, and I wore myself into the ground where I ended up with viral meningitis. And from where am I sitting? I ended up missing my senior year of high school. So it changed the
Wow.
whole track of my life. And then when I was in college, if I would always talk people into go running with me, but what I just had this really bad habit of saying, hey, we're just going to run 5 miles, but everybody trusted me. So we'd run 5 miles, but then I'd add a few more miles in. So we'd have 7, then we'd have 7 more to go back. And then one by one, every training partner got injured until finally I was
Oh
injured.
no. Yeah, yeah, for
So
sure.
I think it was a combination of two things: overtraining for sure, and
Yeah.
then number two is, especially back in the 1980s, shoes weren't very good, and shoes
Sure.
do make a difference. I have been extremely skeptical in the past about how important shoes were, but one of the devices that we bought in our clinic in Eugene was a pressure sensor treadmill. So what we would do is bring people in, they would bring 4 pairs of shoes in, and then we videotape their foot position and pressure sensor with each pair of shoe to find which shoe fit best. And so that was about 10 years ago. And I work with I have 3 physicists that work with me, physics
Cool.
background. And it was very clear that shoes made a very, very big difference. And now some people say, well, that's obvious. No, it's not obvious because the research doesn't clearly indicate that what is the best shoe. And I know there's a lot of running podcasts out there always talk about what's the best shoe. I think you'd have to look at the individual. I think you'd have
Yeah.
to do a clear analysis. But so I would say my injuries were a result of tremendous overtraining with the idea that, well, I just need to do more to be better. And there were no clear mechanisms. That's what everybody did with everything.
Yeah.
And then the shoes. And so I think I ran so much by the time I was in probably around the age of 30. That's when I started it. It got away from Achilles tendonitis and plantar fasciitis stuff in the foot and ankle, and then it moved into a severe sciatica up in my
Mm.
back. And then I had pain down my leg. And that is not an uncommon condition when people transition into their early 30s. Usually you're a little more sedentary because you're working and you're sitting all day long, and then you're going out and doing your long runs. And then if you have a family, you're trying to get your runs in real short, and you're doing workouts that are not, um, they're less than ideal.
Mhm.
So I think those would be the two things. And that's what I see on a regular basis. I think the number one thing to take away is, let's say you were lifting weights. Well, one, you wouldn't bench every single day. You'd bench maybe
Sure.
2 days a week. I'd also clearly know if the weight was too heavy. I would struggle with it. Whereas running, people tend to run every day or very often. Doesn't give the tissue time to recover, and it doesn't allow the motor control system to kind of reset. So it fatigues the motor control system. But then also it would be, you're not clear when you're not running well. If your biomechanics are off, you can continue to run through that and not be
Yeah.
consciously aware, which is where the idea, you could see it on the pressure sensor treadmill, but the challenge is that's on a treadmill in a clinic. And this is where probably 10 years ago, it's like, we need a device that we can look at the biomechanics of the hips and lower extremities outside of the clinic. And that's one of the
Yeah.
ideas for our device that we developed. So we needed something that could monitor to say, hey, can I look at my phone or look at my watch when I'm running if I have a sensor on that's telling me, a perfect example. Let's say you're going to go out and run 10 miles. How do I know at mile 5 that my mechanics are still ideal? I
Yeah.
could cardiovascular feel great, but
Sure.
my muscles may be becoming fatigued, or one or two particular muscles, and I'm not aware of that. So like our device, for example, let's say I'm going to do a 10-mile run. At mile 5, I would look at our device, and one of the things it does is it measures symmetry between the left side, right side, front, back, top, bottom. So all 3 planes of motion. Mile 5, I look good. Then I look at my watch, or I look at my camera where the data's coming through. And now at mile 6, I've got a tremendous asymmetry. I'm spending 20-30% more of my time or my weight bearing on my right side, and
Wow,
I'm
that's
also
cool. You can see
rotating.
that.
Yeah, so then what would be one of the things that we could do? Well, I would suggest that you're done running. Now, most people will say, well, I need to run through. I've got 10 miles on my schedule, and it's like, no, no, no. This is where the injuries probably occur. Because if
Mm.
you're spending a disproportionate amount of time on one side or the other for 4 more miles, you're going to overload the tissue. The muscle gets fatigued, it gets tired. So this is some of the current hypothesis is the muscle gets exhausted and then the mechanical load goes into the fascia, the tendons, the ligaments, and we could clearly distinguish what those different tissues are. I don't think it's overwhelmingly all. But what it is those tissues are not designed to take up the load. So this is where we think where you get the microfractures of the tissue, the collagen starts to fracture, you get a little inflammation, then the body senses something's wrong, and then we may or may not get a pain signal. And then that alters how the muscle functions in return. So it's a big reflex loop. So what this device does, we've designed something that can give you a clue as to when you need to stop. And then this is just the beginning, but we did 100 subject study over the last 2 summers, and we've got some pretty good data. So I would say to kind of summarize where I was running way too much. I had no idea whether I was getting exhausted. I would run as long as my cardiovascular system
Yep.
supported me, but I
Yeah.
had no idea whether I was getting injured. And then again would be the shoes, which
Yeah.
one of the things we're working on with our device now is could you like go to REI, let's say for example, pick up 4 pairs of shoes, somebody that would allow you to take the shoes, and then you try out each pair of shoes, maybe try them out on a treadmill so that you can take them back. Or a shoe clinic could use our device with the treadmill in there and then take a look a little bit more and say, okay, this shoe's like, wow, this is not good. The one challenge we would have with that, especially with marathon runners and endurance runners, would be that you might look good for the first 1 to 2 miles.
Yeah. And then
Maybe
things fall
as
apart.
your hip muscles start to get fatigued, let's use the word fatigue for right now, um, then that may change the way the shoe is interacting with the ground as well. So it
Mm.
might not just be the shoe itself. It could be that the shoe changes in response, the shoe position changes in response to what's going up the chain, whether it's usually not in the knee. The knee will hurt because it's stuck between two complex joints, ankle, foot, and hip. And then
Yeah.
we also have to consider the trunk. And then one other thing to make this even more complex is that this pelvic girdle has to move in response to the shoulder girdle above. And if you kind of like next week when you're running the Eugene Marathon, it'd be kind of fun
Yeah.
looking around you and watch how people's shoulders move. Often one time you'll see one arm that doesn't move forward. It doesn't move at all. It kind of stays
Interesting.
to the
Yeah.
side. So people kind of run. You watch people running ahead of you, they'll be doing a little helicopter thing. It seems that it's more common in females where I'll notice this on trails, they'll come in all scuffed up on the back of their calves. And it's because as the leg's coming off the ground, the heel is hitting the opposite calf. And it's,
Mm.
trail, it leaves all muddy. It's like, okay, that is not good. I call it a helicopter pattern. It's not been very clear in the literature why that's happening. I suspect it's from the hip. And a lot of people might be listening or people are really into biomechanics say, well, that should be obvious what that is. I'm like, show me the data. I don't want to,
Yeah, prove it.
we're doing the research. I'd like to get away from everybody's opinions
Sure.
because we have too many injuries. And I think that running can be, I've come full circle. I think you should, if you have the ability to run and it helps you emotionally, psychologically, or to maintain your blood sugar or your strength, your mental capacity, I think there's a lot of significant positives in running. And when should you stop running? When you figure it out. I mean, as you get older, there'll be a point at which, and this is where my 20 years experience in Eugene, I used to tell people, I don't think it's clear. They come in with running injuries. I say, I don't think that running is going to be good for you. And that never went over very well. So what I figured out over time is this person's going to figure it out themselves when
Yeah.
they've been injured so many times that they're like, okay, I need to shift to hiking. I need to shift into another activity because it's not worth spending 6 months doing massage and physical therapy and chiropractic care. I need to shift into something that's a little more healthy. So, but yeah, I think there's a tremendous amount of upside, and the research is pretty clear that it can also be very good for joints, running itself,
Sure.
as long as you're
Sure.
keeping it within the constraints of not becoming too fatigued.
Yeah. No, that makes so much sense. This is also super interesting. I'm curious. I feel like marathon runners are and ultra runners too are kind of their own breed of people. I'm sure those are some of your more difficult patients to deal with. But you mentioned something a few minutes ago about how they would come in and you would recommend, hey, maybe you should pull back. How do you approach somebody that's in the middle of a marathon block? Because I can speak for myself in saying if my PT in the middle of a marathon block where I physically was feeling well, but maybe my mechanics were a little bit off, if he told me, hey, I think you should pull back, I'd be like, you're crazy. I got a marathon to run. So how do you typically deal with patients like that?
At my age, after doing this for 40 years, and I coached a lot of elite athletes for wrestling in particular, it's your choice. You're an adult. I mean, if you're over
Yeah,
the age of 18, if you're under the age of 18, then we just sit down with the parents and we make a decision. But if you're in the middle of a marathon, I'd say, okay, how important is this to you? So this is where it comes into having your own agency, your own self, and say,
yeah,
okay, here's the situation. I'm not here to tell you what to do. Now that doesn't work a lot. That doesn't work with some patients and or athletes. They really need a practitioner that's going to be, I think, more authoritarian. That doesn't fit me, except at the high school level. I'll be much more of
sure.
like, this is what we're doing because obviously you don't have the experience to not injure yourself. I need to step in here with your parent. But no, like an adult, if you came in, I would say, okay, we're halfway to the marathon. Um, how important is this to you? And if you said it's very important, I say, okay, recognize that you're probably going to end up with some significant more dysfunction and or injuries, but let's just get you through the season. Let's get you through the game. As also an athlete trainer, so I'd say, okay, how important is this game? Do you want to come back after halftime? One of the things I started to do with my high school wrestlers and other guys when I was coaching directly was if they seemed to be injured, I pulled them off. Let's say we're in the middle of a match, and just use this an analogy. I'd pull them off the edge of the mat, and I would say, okay, do you want to continue? If they hesitate for a second, I pulled them. But if they
Mm,
said, no, coach, I want to stay in. So if you came in and say, no, I want to run this marathon, and I'd say, okay, let's maybe do. I'm not really big on taping. I think that there's some benefits to kinesio tape and McConnell taping. I mean, I'm an athlete trainer, but I also
sure.
think tape is expensive. But if you think it's beneficial, it is beneficial. So I'd say, okay, let's come up with a strategy to get you through this marathon. Again, you recognizing that you may spend the next 3 to 6 months after this in rehab. I mean, or finding some, you might not be able to run very well. We're going to need to take some time off and then recalibrate and then figure out, okay, what's the next step? Do you want to continue
Yeah,
to run another marathon? And if you do, these are the things, one of the main goals is to not get injured to the best of your ability or to minimize your risk for injury. So I think if you're an adult and you're totally aware of what the situation is, yeah, we'll work through that. Now, if I think you're seriously going to be injured, I would say I highly recommend that we follow up with like an orthopedic consult or
yeah,
somebody that's like, let's get some more people involved in this as a team, which is what I have at the Division 1 level when I've been an athlete trainer or work with professional athletes or work with the Nike athletes. We worked as a team.
makes
And
sense. Yeah,
so, yeah, that would be my team approach is to bring not another physical therapist in. I would definitely say, no, I need somebody with some orthopedic specialty. Let's get some imaging done. Maybe let's say you have quote shin splints. It's kind of a garbage term, but an all-inclusive term. It's like, let's run a bone scan. I'm concerned that there's actually some microfractures in here. If I'm concerned about the long run, you need to be at least aware, and then you can make your own decision. It's your health decision. So.
makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I relate to this so much. I'll tell a little bit of a personal anecdote, but this Eugene marathon that I'm training for has been one of the worst training blocks that I've gone through. I've talked about it a little bit on this show, but started with what was a foot injury at first, or what I thought was a foot injury. Kind of sought out a ton of resources, like a foot and ankle doctor at first, and then we saw a PT, and I've been working with a movement performance coach. But the first time that I actually was able to make progress was the first person that said, "Hey, has anybody looked at your hips?" So it's very interesting that you're talking about the knee to or hip to knee to ankle relationship, because that's something that I've been definitely dealing with lately, and something that until somebody looked at it, my entire biomechanics top to bottom, we weren't able to make any progress. So super interesting.
Have you gotten better as a result of the more focus toward the hip?
Yes, yeah. Since I've been working with the movement coach and working on strengthening my hips, because I'm not kidding. He showed me the video of when he had me run in front of him. He took a video of me running, and I don't pull anything with my left hip. Everything I'm pulling is on the right side, and I had no idea. So what you were saying about like us as runners, relying on our endurance or relying on just cardiovascular strength as our like, should I keep going or not? I guess threshold. I felt great physically. I was in shape, doing good. Everything felt good until it wasn't, until my foot started to take me down. So, but since we've been strengthening the hips for sure, I've been able to feel a big difference in my foot. And that just like blows my mind that those two things could possibly be related. I had zero idea before this whole thing.
No, and that's great for you. You know, I've been around this so long, and a lot of my influence with the hip, I've got a lot of different influences. As an athlete trainer, I say this story over and over. I graduated in 1987 or 1988 with my undergraduate degree in athlete training,
Sure.
and I felt like I was extremely limited with my toolbox. And then that's like, well, back then, it was very rare. It was very hard to get into physical therapy programs back in that time because there weren't very many programs. So I was extremely fortunate, blessed to get into University of Michigan. I had a very good interview. They don't interview very often anymore. So we had like a tremendous number of applicants, and somehow I made the top 36. And
Nice.
3 years of graduate school there, but at the University of Michigan, it was truly about what people often hear as critical thinking. It was about critical thinking. I'm not sure
Yeah.
people define that now, but they weren't into teaching tricks or interventions. They're like, this is 3 years of how to think. So I came out of that program, and it was an incredible program. It was a tremendous experience. I think University of Michigan, our professors, I owe a lot to them. But then the day I graduated, I decided I didn't want to stay in physical therapy. I decided again, I'm like, wow, I spent 4 years undergraduate. I felt like I didn't learn anything. Then I went
Yeah.
on to graduate school for PT, and I felt like, wow, I still didn't really learn anything. So now I've got 7 years of school in. And so I was going to go back and do my PhD in biological anthropology, which is a big interest where I started out. It's funny now, most of the literature that I read on the hips and on the musculoskeletal system are in biological anthropology literature. They're not usually in physical therapy. I think physical therapy literature um, has other focus than biomechanics. It's been extremely frustrating, or it's a very
Mm.
limited approach to how the body works.
Mm.
So yeah, and then that's why when we moved from Michigan out to Port Angeles, Washington, I was in the process of looking at, I looked at Cal Berkeley. It was way too expensive to live down there. It's kind of funny now in the 1990s, we thought it was expensive. Now it's
And it's unreal now. Yeah.
a little different. So I always say
Yeah.
with the other people, if you think housing, it's always kind of been crazy on the West Coast
Yeah.
and expense. And so we came up to Port Angeles, Washington, which is on the peninsula, and on the map, it looks very close to Seattle. It is not very close. I
No,
thought
it's not.
have to
Yeah.
drive around the peninsula, then take the ferries and drive into
Yep.
Seattle. So that kind of got pushed to the side. And that's why I found a program down in Provo, Utah at Rocky Mountain University of Healthcare Professions. And that's where I did my PhD. So I was down there about every 3 months for 6 or 7 days. And then you had to find your own committee members. So I found one at the University of Colorado, Barbara Headley, who's since passed. And I found two people at the University of Oregon that decided to be on my doctoral dissertation committee. So
Cool.
I'm very, very, very grateful. So yeah, I've had a very different approach. But prior to the PhD, when we moved to Port Angeles, I was strongly encouraged. I worked at a clinic where there were 18 people, and there was only one male, which was me. And I was about the age of 30, and they were all fantastic women that were a little bit older, a lot more experienced than I was in physical therapy. And they strongly encouraged me before I left the field of physical therapy to go over to Edmonds, Washington. I like to tell this story because I owe everything to this person. There was something
Yeah.
called Ursa Foundation, and it was an old osteopathic physician. His name was Dr. Lauren Rex. He went by Bear. He was world internationally renowned. This giant 300-pound man with a big hairy beard. And I went over and took a class, and it changed my life. That was in 1996. It was looking at osteopathic principles. And I tell this all the time. The class is all day Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And Bear picked on me the entire time I was there. There was about 24 people in the class, and he'd ask me a question, and I would answer it, and he would just kind of laugh. And I learned how interconnected the system was.
Yeah.
I think the thing that blew me away, the most influential, is we put somebody on their side. You may have had this done that had
Yeah.
quote weak hipness, and they pushed down on
Sure.
his. And then Bear said, "What would you do with this person?" And I'm an athlete trainer PT, so I said, "Well, strengthen." And he just kind of blew me off. He goes, "Ah." And he went up and he did some little trick in the neck. And we came back and I checked the strength of the hip and it was completely normal.
Oh,
And he said, "Why
wow.
don't you
That's
do time
cool.
with exercises?" And he said, "Sean, quit saying things are weak. They might be weak, but all you can say is that patient lacks the ability in that muscle or that region to produce force. Now, it could be because they're weak, and then you would strengthen it. But it also could be because there's some type of neurological mechanism that's keeping those muscles from wanting to kick in. There
Yeah.
could be some feedback. So yeah, it might be so much as maybe I need to manipulate the ankle, do a high velocity thrust to the ankle. Now all of a sudden the hip muscles are working. So this is what led me down the road with my PhD. That's like, wow, what if we think the hip is just weak, but really it's the quadratus lumborum, as an example, that's
Yeah.
irritating. If I treat how would I treat the quadratus lumborum? I could do manual pressure on it. You can do something called dry needling into the muscle.
Yep.
You
Been
can
doing
do
a lot
some,
of that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a, that's my PhD is in trigger points in the quadratus lumborum and the gluteus medius muscle. Yeah, so it's like, how does dry needling work? Um, I don't think it's very clear. I mean, I defended the work in my dissertation.
Sure.
I don't think that it's very clear that what the exact mechanism. There may be people want to argue with me and say, show me the literature. It's usually very poor in terms of its methodology and limited number of people, but it's clear to me that the dry needling and or manual pressure on trigger points can be successful for some people. But then the question we'd have to step back a little further is say, okay, why is there a trigger point or hyper irritability in this muscle? Well, that's where we need a device, like our device, or looking at
Yeah.
other biomechanical devices. What is it about? Why is that quadratus lumborum, as an example, why would the quadratus lumborum be irritated? So one reason could be is that the quadratus lumborum, if the hips are not moving appropriately over time, as the muscles became fatigued, the mechanical load may be going into the lumbar spine, and that quadratus lumborum is not large enough to be a stabilizer for the lumbar spine. It can do it to some degree, but what it will do is it'll just get tighter and tighter. And then for some reason, it can tend to cause the gluteal muscles, glute medius, minimus, and maximus, not to fire or produce
Mm.
torque. So let's say, for an example, I test your strength. We'll say the strength. It should
Yeah.
be more force production. So I check
Yeah.
your strength and it appears weak. Now I start you on a whole bunch of exercises. Well, if it's not a strength issue, I'm just going to reinforce a negative reflex pattern, potentially.
Makes
I
sense.
don't know
Yeah.
until the individual is there. So I want to be very clear. I'm generalizing here. I'd still need
Sure.
to see
Yeah.
the individual or the practitioner. I can't make assumptions. I can't make these huge. I would say, is it important for practitioners to look at the quadratus lumborum, to look at all these muscles? Absolutely. And then one of the other tools that we use with muscles that's not oftentimes used within physical therapy, but should be in every clinic, is when you move a muscle, it generates an electrical current. We can show you that here if you want to come in when you're in Eugene.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
I'd love to.
yeah, it's called electromyography. It's like when you have a heart attack, you do an EKG.
Yeah.
So let's say you come in with your hip issue. What would I want to look at specifically? I'd want to look at how is your gluteus maximus? One, is it firing? So we'll put electrodes onto your glutes, surface electrodes, and then I put it on the tensor fascia lata muscle in the front. And there's some research to say, okay, is there too much of a pull, too much activity in the tensor fascia lata versus the gluteus maximus? So there should be a balance there, and we measure those in microvolts. And
Cool.
oftentimes people, when they do task or exercises, there's way too much activity going on in the front of the hip. So the tensor fascia lata is overly active, and it is a default. As it appears as the hip extensor muscles become weaker or don't produce the force, the mechanical load to help you keep running is going to be in the tensor fascia lata. Now, is there a problem with that? Yeah, one, it's very hard to treat because the muscle kind of rolls. And
Yeah.
also, the muscle sits encapsulated within the fascia, which is part of that fascia is the iliotibial band. And the iliotibial band is consistent all the way down into the plantar fascia of the foot. So if I've got a
Yeah.
fascia lata that's overly active, it tends to expand, or it changes the mechanical tension in the lateral, the outside of the leg, and that can change the way all of the structures move down into the foot. So let's say, for example, with your plantar fascia, there's a
Yeah.
possibility, hypothetically, that that came from you became fatigued, you start using the muscles in the front a little bit too much. As you overuse a muscle, it'll become a little stiffer, and then what happens is it's encapsulated within this fascia. And the fascia in the body is continuous from the neck down. We call that the deep fascia. And so that's another thing. So there's all these things that you would want physical therapists or chiropractors or massage therapists, anybody that works with runners, if they want to be more effective. And there's a lot of things to consider, and it makes it a lot of fun, and it doesn't take
It
that much
does.
time. You just have to look at it conceptually. So I think we could go back to is one of the reasons I became so intrigued with running is because it's biomechanically very complex.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's, there's a famous saying, don't run to be fit, but you must be fit to run. And a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah. Yeah.
people try to get fit through running. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. You got to get in shape before you start running
Sure.
to get the fitness. Or I think that's another reason people want to run marathons is often to get themselves in shape. Or they're pre-diabetic and it's like, wow, I need to get my blood sugar under control. And
Yeah.
you start a running program and you go online and you find a coach or you find a book and it's like you're off to the races. I appreciate online training. I appreciate all this stuff, but you still have to look. I think one of the reasons we're not very successful in a lot of what we do within medicine and health and wellness is because we're not individualizing the plans, or I would say we're I don't know what the right word to use anymore politically, but I would say that we're not really doing what we say we're doing. We're not individualizing plans. We're just doing like a cookie cutter algorithm. Everybody
I would
needs
agree
to
with
do
you.
clam
Yeah.
salad, and everybody needs to stretch their IT band, and everybody needs to
Yeah.
do this. It's like, no, you kind of lost me on there might be. Now, having said that, I mean, I get excited about this stuff. What do I think everybody needs to do? Everybody in the world would benefit is strength training.
Yeah. Totally
100%.
agree. It comes up a ton on this show. It's the
Yeah,
number one thing that we throw out the window when we start a marathon plan is like, I just want to run. I don't want to spend time in the gym. I don't want to do all these things, but I 100% agree. Like personally, it changed my running when I started to take strength training seriously. So for sure.
yeah, and you get a lot of. I've said this on other podcasts, and I'm going to be biased. I don't care if people want to criticize me. I think I'm correct in my approach. I spent 40 years doing this. I think I'm a considerably better practitioner now than I was even 3 to 5 years ago. Because I think one of the things I look for when I hire employees as well, and with patients that do well, are those that are intellectually curious.
Yeah.
I don't do as well with the really hardcore, people say, well, this is the only way we're going to do this. It's like, it doesn't work for me. I'm going to take a different path from that. I'm interested in learning from somebody that has these ideas, and I'll take the things that I think could work for me or make sense. But overall, do I flip flop around? I don't flip flop around on the strength training. But I said this on one of the last podcasts I did a few weeks ago, and they were a lot of runners do one-legged strength activities. So they do one
Yeah.
leg. I'm very, very overall, in general, everything's a generalized statement. I'm very
Yeah.
opposed to one-legged activities
Oh, interesting.
unless you're strong on two legs. I think a lot of the
Mm.
one-legged stuff is advanced. So I'm not understanding. It's like, okay, we're doing the same thing here. This person's injured through running. So now we're going to start them on an advanced one-legged squat or one-legged lunge or whatever we want to do. But it's like, wait a minute, how solid are these people? Like, let's say a squat, for example.
Sure.
Tell me a squat. And I do powerlifting. I'm very, very close to breaking the world records here. I just missed it a year ago. So it's like I have a tremendously gifted coach, and I'm surrounded every single repetition I do 2 to 3 days a week. And all my three lifts, deadlifts, squats, and power lifts, I have a coach watching me on every single repetition. And every one I'm getting feedback. And so the one-legged stuff is just really complex. So if I take somebody that doesn't have really good motor skills and then I videotape them, I don't want to spend all my time with somebody doing a one-legged lunge with the leg on the back of the bench saying, keep your knee in, keep your knee in. It's like, put both legs on the ground. Let me watch you squat. Let me see if you're leaning to one side or the other with the hips, because let's say you do a squat and I'm looking at you from the backside. if your weight tends to shift toward one side, there may be weakness in that hip. So
Yeah.
I don't want to isolate it. I need to make sure that it is strong within the context of doing that. If you can't squat well with two legs, why are you squatting on one leg? And the people may argue with me, but I'm not.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
I don't think it's a belief. I can demonstrate that there's better ways. So start out at the basics, and if you need to move on, you're already doing a bunch of one-legged things with running, right? That's all you're doing with one-legged. So why am
Sure.
I putting more demands? And I think that that's kind of the philosophy. It's like, well, why would I do two legs when running is just one leg? Well, because as a human being, you need to be strong on both legs. You need your whole
Sure.
body to be strong in your core, whatever that means. You need to just be strong as a person. Would a runner like yourself, would they benefit from bench press as well? Absolutely, if you're doing it correctly. Why would you not want to make your whole, and you can get a lot out of just one day a week of lifting.
Yeah.
You can devote one day a week. To a lot of runners, they don't have time, but it's like devote 45 minutes. You could do squats, you could do deadlifts, you could do something that you can do well, and is that going to have a carryover? I would argue yes. Is the research out there clearly? No, because there's very little good research on anything. Even the things that you think that are probably very well, strength training is still a big argument. But within powerlifting, well, unfortunately, with all these podcasts, did you have everybody trying to sell programs and sell their books and so
Yeah.
forth?
Yeah.
They want to have a review on somebody's review on somebody's review
Totally.
and
Yep.
argue with them. It's like, I'm not interested in that game anymore. I can only control the little world that I'm involved in. I'm not trying to make a
Totally.
change in the world as a whole. So for those people that work with that attitude, that usually works well with me.
Makes sense. Yeah. I am curious because this is a question that I get all the time, and I'd be curious your input on it. But I get asked all the time on social media, what is your routine? Like, what is your running strength mobility routine? Is there an ideal, Monday I'm gonna do strength, Tuesday I'm gonna run, Wednesday I'm gonna do strength? Do you have an ideal, I guess, formula for something like that, or does that even, exist?
It's a great question. I think that's where if you were really, so I think if I were to just start out as a beginner runner and I didn't want to use a coach, and I think coaches are hard to find, good coaches, but let's say you have a good coach,
Yeah.
and I know one if you guys need one down the road. I'm very good. I work with a lot. Yeah, I would say if you're starting out, I would devote one, and you have a limited time. I mean, people get busy, so clearly the best program is the one that you're going to do. That's
Yeah,
hands down. If I give you
definitely.
3 days a week weight training and you don't have time, that's a complete waste of time. But if I
Yeah,
can
what's the
say,
point?
listen, this is extremely important that you get one day a week. Does the literature show that one day a week of strength training is beneficial? Absolutely. We do those studies with the geriatric population where we have less money. So I would devote one day a week to strength training. What would be one of the better ways to start out? There's a guy, Mark Ripito, Starting Strength. He has a podcast. He hates physical therapists. He's very, very clear about that, but his program is really great. And they have one for elderly people as well. So Starting Strength would look at 5 sets of 5. You would do, let's say you as a you come in to see me and say, okay, where are we going to start? I'm like, okay, we have one day a week, so we're going to bench, we're going to deadlift, we're going to squat, as long as they're safe, teach you how to do it appropriately. Then say, okay, you could bench 100 pounds for one repetition. I'd say then you're going to take 80% of that. It's going to be 80 pounds. You're going to do 5 sets of 5, one day a week. And then the next week, maybe you'll add 2.5 pounds onto that until you can't do any further. Same thing with your squat and your deadlift. So I really like the Starting Strength. A lot of power lifters get frustrated with Mark Ripito. Mark Ripito was a former power lifter, but
Hmm.
he's very clear. He goes, what's the name of my program? Starting Strength. So it's not for intermediate or advanced runners or lifters per se. So I
Yeah.
would do that. And then I'd probably devote 2 to 3 days. If I was going to run a program, I do a lot of periodization. So I'd say, well, this is what I'm going to do for the first 4 weeks. I'm going to run 2 days a week and see where I go with that. And then find something reasonable to run. And then the next month I would say, okay, I'm going to run 3 days a week if I haven't been injured. I'm going to just stay very, very consistent with that strength program. And then I'm just going to just slowly, incrementally, I'd have to look at the literature, and it would depend on the demographics, how old the person is, their
Hmm.
prior conditioning, their metabolic health. You look at all those factors. But yeah, I would devote 2 to 3 days to running during the first week. Even when you get some slight injuries like Achilles tendonitis, pain around the heel. If it wasn't really super irritated, I would modify my program, decrease the amount of running, but I would still run. So you have to do kind of an active recovery. The challenge you get into sometimes with running injuries is people just say, well, I'm just going to take a couple weeks off. If
Sure.
it's super acute, I can understand that. But I've come to find over, 20 years plus of working with the elite runners that usually is not, we need to be running a little bit in order to keep the tissue strong within that activity. But I would just
Right.
modify the core. And again, it can get so exacerbated that it would just be ridiculous to do that.
Sure. Sure.
Well, yeah, so starting, I would say 2 to 3 days of running, but I mean, I would 100% get that strength training in. And as you get better with the squats and the deadlifts, and again, why would we do bench if you're a runner? Well, it's like we're integrating this whole body for motor
Yeah.
control and strength. Yeah, it's you can work on your mobility within the deadlifts and the squat routine itself. So you don't even need to specifically do a lot of stretching. Stretching's a whole nother controversy. For every article that you show me benefits, decreases risk of injuries, I can show you an article that shows that it doesn't do anything. So I think what
Yeah.
do you what do you take away from that? You have to look at yourself as an individual. And there's some people that need to stretch, and then there's some people that might not need much, and then there's some people that probably need to be stretching their hips in particular a lot more.
Yeah.
And when we get into stretching, you could say I would say there's a tremendous overuse of calf stretching that makes absolutely no sense because most people don't know how to measure. They'll have people squat and say, oh, your ankles are stiff, you need to stretch them out. And it's like, well, your ankles are stiff within the squatting, but if I put your foot up, let's say on a counter, on a bench, and I have you lean your knee forward, oftentimes the mobility is there in the ankle. It's just that when you're on both feet or running, your motor control strategy is not to go into full mobility. So that's a motor
Mm.
control. So if you think somebody's have stiff ankles because they can't squat, or you're videotaping them and they're not going into full mobility, it could be more of a motor control. You just need to retrain the system. If you start to stretch stuff that's already stretched, it's a complete waste of time, and you got limited amount of time. And two, it might be aggravating the tissue by overstretching. Overstretching, it's not good either. So
Yeah. Yeah, I interviewed a PT friend a couple weeks ago on the show, and she was talking about how people come to her all the time with an injury and say, "Oh, it's probably because I don't do my stretching before my run, or I don't do enough of my post-recovery stretches." And she was like, "If you think that the reason that you have this injury is because you didn't stretch before your runs, you're crazy." So I know I've heard that from a couple different people.
yeah, and again, the whole concept here is you have to look at, and this is where the experience comes in of being almost 60
Yeah,
and raising 4 kids and doing research and coaching is for that individual. I individualize that. It's like maybe it is for her, but who knows,
yeah,
right? I mean, but as a general rule, no. But that's why I think it's every person you have to, and every time a person comes in, you have to individualize it. So I'll always say, hey, where are you at? If you were to come in to see me for an initial evaluation, you'll fill out all your paperwork, and that's helpful to a degree. But I'm like, what is your goal here? What is it that you want to do that you can't do? And where do you think that
yeah,
I'm very big on the we. What do you think it is that I can do and we can do together? Because I don't know you. I'm not within you. I do a lot of time asking a lot of questions, especially with, well, runners and chronic pain, especially chronic low back pain, is trying to figure out how people think about the world. Like I do a lot of hands-on therapy, but there are certain individuals that don't believe in hands-on. They just believe in exercise. So will I try and push the hands-on? No, absolutely not. What I'll do is do what they believe works, to the extent where if it's not working and you build up a trust with the person over a few weeks or a month or so, then say, hey, here's some other things I'd like to do that I do with other people. Would you be okay if we manipulate this hip or manipulate the neck?
smart.
Yeah, and you say, okay, well, wait a minute. Why would you manipulate my neck if I have a knee problem with running? It's like, well, because in the body you've heard the word diaphragm. And
Hmm.
like when I ask you, what do you think the diaphragm? Do you think of just one structure?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I think. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, diaphragm means pump. There's actually 5 diaphragms in the body. You have one in your
Wow,
brain
did not know
between,
that.
yeah, no, but yeah, be very clear. So you have one up in your brain. You have one before you take a breath in, your tongue actually stabilizes. There's one right in your throat. It's called a bucopharyngeal.
Interesting.
Then you have one right at the top of your collarbone. Then you have the big one that everybody's aware of. And then you have your pelvic diaphragm, which is a lot of women's health and wellness treats pelvic floor. And so all those diaphragms, when you take a breath in, they all have to descend. And then what they do is they recoil and they help venous vein return and lymphatic return. So what controls the major diaphragm, the one underneath your rib cage, is your mid neck, your cervical number 3, 4, 5. And so we have a saying in rehab, it's like break your neck at C5, stay alive, break at C4, be no more. You could be running where you're using more of your shoulder girdles up toward your shoulders, toward your neck. You can make this whole neck region really tight, and that could change the outflow from the mid-cervical, it's called the phrenic nerve, that comes down to the diaphragm. So I might need to go in and manipulate the mid-neck to hypothetically change the control mechanism in the diaphragm below. And so if I
So
have one
interesting.
diaphragm that's not working well, it also could affect the pelvic diaphragm. And the pelvic diaphragm is out of sync so that the diaphragms are both not coming down at the same time. That can trap extra fluid in the leg. So it might end up with a little bit extra, the leg gets swollen. You'll see a lot of people now using compression stockings on their legs. There's a number of
Yep.
Olympic runners that, and that's usually because they're not draining very well. They're not getting the fluid back. And if you're not getting the fluid back into the heart, you're also significantly, potentially compromising your cardiovascular performance because that
Interesting. So
fluid
it's all
needs,
related.
yeah, and the heart, everybody thinks that the heart is just the primary pump mechanism. And I don't want to get too much into the controversy of this, but
Yeah, yeah.
you can look at the heart as nothing but, I'm going to simplify this. It is like a balloon-like structure that has many sensors around it. And its health depends on all that fluid stretching it so that it can get stretched out so it receives the right communication or sensory feedback. But what could happen is if you're running a lot and you're getting a lot of muscle damage and your pelvic diaphragm's not working, as an example, that extra fluid that's getting trapped in the leg, it's not getting back to the heart to stretch the heart the way that it needs to be stretched, and the heart can become compromised. One, you'd have to worry about that as you get older, maybe in terms of your overall cardiac health itself,
Sure.
and you can look at it from a performance measure as well. It's like, wow, I wonder why I'm not getting better. And you're looking at your feet, they're swollen. You're like, okay, wow, I got to figure out a way. How do I get the fluid out of my leg? Is it because I'm overtraining, doing so much damage that now the fluid leaks? It stays down in the legs. There's reason why that happens. And or do I have something going on in my mid neck? Because as I get tired, I'm running, I start bringing my shoulders up toward my ears. I'm making this whole shoulder girdle region tight. And so, yeah, you have to, when I'm running, am I just running with one arm going forward and the other arm staying at my side? So that's going to affect the way the body's kind of like a towel. If I have a towel and it's wet and I want to get the water out of it. If I twist it in the same direction with both hands, it doesn't drain, right? What I
Sure.
need to do is
Yeah.
torsion it. That's how the shoulder girdle and pelvic girdle work together. Let's say my right leg goes forward. I'll just ask you, what shoulder goes, so if I bring my right leg forward to run, what arm
Yeah.
goes forward?
Oh God, you're gonna make me think. Left, I would think, right?
Yeah, so think about
Yeah.
that. If my right leg goes forward, my pelvis rotates to the left.
Yeah.
If I'm a towel or a cylinder, I have to bring my shoulder girdle the opposite direction, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the tie-in there. So there's neuromechanical fascial tie-ins. That's one of the reasons we do that, besides mechanical efficiency, is to move fluid.
Interesting.
It's in lymphatic.
Yeah.
So that's why you want to look at the shoulder girdle. Why, if I'm a runner, why do I want to be strong and mobile in the shoulder girdle? I don't need to do that. If you want to be good at what you do you want to last at what you do you want to distribute the load evenly? Yeah, I think if you want to, I hate this word, but it's overused, but if I want to optimize my performance, yeah, you have to look, there's not one component within this body that is not communicating with other parts. This system is a whole to a degree that's very, very hard to grasp.
Yeah.
And the body is dynamic. It is always changing. Every second it is changing. And it's very non-linear. So just because I take ball A and hit ball B, that would be linear. But if I hit ball A and then it hits ball Z, all over the place, the body's very non-linear. And it's because it's dynamically trying to continue to exist as a whole. So if I have inappropriate sensory information coming in terms of chemical irritation with inflammation, if I've got bad shoes, That's noise in the system, and then the output might not be optimal in terms of how I perform. So we have to look at the metabolic, we have to look at you know, the mechanical, we have to look at all of it. And I think the challenge you get into with physical therapists or chiropractors or people do hands-on, they're looking at just one part of the body, which is the biomechanical. Now the argument could be, and it's a term that we call mechanotransduction, mechano and transduction. There's Donald Ingber at Harvard University. He's convinced that 95% of all diseases, and we could say dysfunction, are a result of inappropriate mechanical signaling going into the body. So it's the mechanical signal that dictates the gene expression. Now there's some arguments for this, and I don't want to go too far down that hole. I would individually if you ever want to go down that road. But
Sure.
there's a reason for they suspect for cancer cells and so forth. But ideally, if I'm a runner, I need to be doing checks and balances down my entire system. One of the things we have with our wearable device is, so it's a little device and we put it over, we're using a belt right now because we're playing around with different ways to do this. We put it right over the sacrum or right below the belt line. And the sacrum, yeah, so that the reason it's there, that's very selective. It's called the sacrum, it means sacred, and then the Greeks and Romans. So that's where, like, I'm running left, I'm going right arm, left leg, or moving opposite. That's where those forces are all kind of collectivized right over the sacrum. And what's unique about that sacrum, when I've done a ton of cadaver dissections and teaching and so forth at the university. And I work very closely with John Runyon, who works at University of Oregon. We talked about this a lot. When we do dissections, I can take anything apart in the body very easily. I cannot get that tissue off the sacrum very well. I mean, you have to scrape it. So that's kind of where all the forces from above and below and opposite sides come together. So we put it over the sacrum, and then when you run, what it does is we have an accelerometer, and I don't want to over complicate this, but we use a simple one. Newton had three laws, and people learn this maybe fourth or fifth grade and forget it. But the second law says force is equal to your mass times your acceleration. So within your mass stays constant. So we can take that out, and now we have force and acceleration are the same thing. To the degree we need to discuss it. So what happens is the accelerometer in there generates a force portrait. And so what you'll see when you run is that it looks like it's a trajectory as to how you're moving, but that's not what it is. It is the forces that you're experiencing from the outside, let's say the ground, the frictional forces, the air forces. And it's the forces externally being applied against the internal forces that you're generating, let's say with muscles. And so what we're looking at is it symmetrical? Now, this is the hypothesis, is if we keep that if things are in symmetry, that they're working, that they're balanced. Now, again, I want to say this is it's a hypothesis because it's coherent and it's plausible. It seems to be true. So we're going to go under that premise. So if we can keep the left and the right side symmetrical and front to right forces, then it gives us a clear picture is, are we distributing mechanical loading into the body in a way that's more ideal? Now, one of the complications we've been coming into lately, people say, well, okay, I just used the device once and it tells me what's wrong. Because what it does is it's when these force portraits, what they do is we took 100 subjects and we measured their 3D, and we did 3D analysis, we did isokinetic strength training, we did use an electrogoniometer to measure range of motion. And then we took the subjective experience of these 100 people. And so we use machine learning or AI systems. So when we let's say you generate a pattern, we match it against those 100 individuals right now. And it tells us where the problem is. Is it a problem with the hip mobility? And oftentimes there's going to be a lack of hip extension going backwards. Is it a problem in hip stability, which would be your strength? Do you have weakness in the gluteus medius and minimus muscles on the side of the hip? So we're getting a hip sway or hip drop. And or another metric would be, are you braking? Meaning, are you getting your heel too far out when you're striking? And the further out that foot is from underneath you, the more force that's being pushed back into the body. So those are three metrics that this device measures right now, and it tells you how to correct it. So you'll get a force portrait. It'll tell you where the problem likely is. It gives you a whole bunch of different metrics. We're only using 3 right now for the most part for diagnostics, but we have 38. It's
wow, cool.
Yeah, we have 38. We have some really interesting things, but our goal right now is to help people understand the three metrics. Is it
Yeah. Start
mobility?
small.
Yeah, we'll just start out very simple. And
Yeah,
I think a lot of people are under the impression that this stuff is only specialists can learn this. That's ridiculous. You learn this stuff in first, second, third grade, and then you just want to make
sure.
it fun. Yeah, and Newton's laws, they're fun if you can apply them in real life. So we get the hip mobility. We look at hip mobility, hip strength or stability, and then braking. And then if you have a problem, it tells you we've got a whole collection of videos to show you some strength exercises or motor control or mobility exercises, how to correct it.
Totally. Yeah. And I think this is a good time for me to say that I'm actually going to be testing it out myself. I think I just got an email from your team today saying it's on the way. So I'm
Good.
very excited to try it out for myself, and very timely with running this marathon and going through this injury too. I'm going to be going into recovery mode very soon. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to check it out and give some feedback. Cool. Well, this is all very fascinating. I'm just sitting here kind of taking it all in. Super, super fascinating. And hopefully our runners that are listening to the podcast can find some value in it as well. I know that this product is pretty new for you. You're looking for feedback, as you said. Do you mind sharing where people can leave you feedback, where they can find you on socials, all that good stuff? I'll make sure to link it, of course. But yeah, where can they find you?
I think it's all under Aletheia Run. Yeah, I'm looking at Armando who's sitting behind me
I'll
over there.
link it too in the show notes.
Yeah. So I think that's where you can find the information. One of my sons designed most of our website as well.
Cool.
And then my daughter Jordan, who's in a lot of the Instagram videos, she's the little blonde that's in there. She lives down in Austin, Texas now. She does a lot of funny stuff. So her background is in physics and cinematography at
Cool.
this point. So she does a lot of the videos helping me out. But yeah, hopefully, yeah, any positive feedback, and if it has to be negative, at least come with a suggestion with it as to
Sure.
how to make it better. Don't need to just troll. I get frustrated with that stuff, but I understand it's part of the game. So yeah. So yeah, and any questions that you have, let me know, and then hopefully I'll see you. When will you be here next week?
Yeah, so I'm coming in Friday. So hopefully I'll have some time to come in. I don't leave until Wednesday the following week. So I'll be
Oh,
in for a little bit.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, stop in the clinic. So it'll be at Tensegrity Physical Therapy, which is in Eugene at the Eugene
Cool.
Hotel. And then Rachel and I used to own the clinic, and then we sold this clinic about 4 years ago to Sean Dorman and Luke Hogel, who have done a fantastic job of continuing. And I'll be back over to help them out as well in the next couple months. I'm going to be transitioning back over into Eugene full time, so I can get involved more with the university and more research that I'm interested, especially in running and aging. And
Yeah.
then hopefully I have another physical therapist that worked for me for 10 years. I'm putting a little pressure on him with this podcast. Hopefully he's going to come back and transition and take over my clinic in Central Oregon. And then that'll be
Awesome.
a collaborative process between the two. So yeah, thank you
Cool.
very much for your time though.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you for coming on. This was great. I'll make sure to link everything in the show notes. And obviously, everybody stay tuned. When I get to try out the product for myself, I'll make sure to post everything on my personal page. It's at tay.says on Instagram. So follow me there. And yeah, I'm sure we'll be communicating again in a couple of months when I've got some results for sure.
And I'll see you next week.
And we'll see you next week. Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Sean, for coming on. This was great.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for tuning into another episode. If you're enjoying My First Marathon, it would mean the world to me if you could rate and review the show. As a reminder, check out myfirstmarathonpodcast.com for free resources. And if you can't get enough MFM for $5 a month, you can also get access to extended episodes, bonus content, and a Q&A corner featuring some of our most popular guests. Check out the exclusives tab on the website for more information. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.